Thank you for joining us at the Evolution of Medicine Summit. A warm welcome. We wanted to make a specific thank you to our sponsors that have made this event possible. Energetics, an innovative natural remedy and supplement company, is committed to revitalizing medicine, and Cyrex Labs, a clinical immunology laboratory specializing in functional immunology and autoimmunity. Most of all, thank you for listening. If you'd like to share this with your colleagues and friends on Facebook if you enjoy the content, and if you have questions, you can ask us on Twitter with the hashtag EvoMed. Finally, if you really want to play your part in accelerating the evolution of medicine, ask your doctor if the Evolution of Medicine Summit might be right for them. Thank you and enjoy. Hello and welcome back to the Evolution of Medicine Summit. This is your host, James Maskell, and I'm really excited to have an expert in the field of immunology and microbiology today to talk about the evolution of immunology. Dr. Aristo Vojdani has been doing this for a very long time. He is a PhD in immunology and microbiology, has done a number of postdoctoral trainings, and holds a number of academic positions, including currently at UCLA. And today we're going to talk about the evolution of immunology. And, this is a topic that potentially is something that's out of the realms of something that's, interesting to the general members of the public. But it is becoming more and more important because the science on immunology and the majority of your immune system is changing significantly. And so who better to be able to speak about that change and the exciting developments in this field than Dr. Vojdani. So thank you for being with us today, Doctor.
Thank you, James, to have me on your program.
It's great to have you here. So, 2011, we have the NIH study on the Human Microbiome Project. And sort of for the first time, the general public and science and the greater medical system started to understand that there was a lot of microbes in the body, more than we thought, and the majority of them were helping us to be healthy. Looking back on that, obviously, this is probably something that you were aware of a lot longer before that. So can you just sort of talk us through this new, this sort of new understanding? And it seems like it must be the most exciting time to be in the field of immunology and microbiology.
Absolutely. This is the most exciting time. And your question is taking me also back to 1965, when I took my first course in immunology and, of course, at the same time, other courses in microbiology. I became in love with the field of immunology. Also, the professor at that time told us the future of medicine is depending, the future of development and progress in medicine is going to depend on immunology and microbiology. And absolutely, he was correct. And now the journal articles by thousands are coming out, started almost 10 years ago, looking and dealing with the importance of gut microbiota in human health and diseases and immune function and so forth.
Absolutely. I mean, the gut microbiome, as soon as I saw it, for me, it was the cover of Scientific American in 2012, June 2012, where I saw that it was reporting on the human microbiome. And I was like, this is something that those holistic doctors, functional doctors, naturopaths that I've worked with for 10 years or 8 years, I saw then at that point that a lot of their understanding of the role of the gut and the role of microbes was now being vindicated by science. Is this the trend that you see, that practitioners that understand that the strategies and things that they've been using are now being sort of understood and vindicated by mainstream science?
Yeah, I heard an expert in alternative medicine during past 30 years, and they were talking about this almost 30 years ago. And so we have to give them a lot of credit for those who were talking about gut dysbiosis 25 years ago, 30 years ago, and its relationship to different diseases. So they were really ahead of their time, or they were not really ahead of their time. Maybe the other part of the medicine was behind.
Yeah, maybe that's a bit more like it. But, there was this time in American medicine between sort of 1913 and the year 2000 where we really got away from this understanding of leaky gut and gut dysbiosis. But my understanding is just before penicillin came out in the early 1910s, 1913, around then there was some understanding of gut dysbiosis by scientists at that point, right?
Yes, in 1908, Mechnikov, the famous Mechnikov, introduced the terminology of gut dysbiosis, 1908. And so when we talk overall about immunology, even in the field of immunology, the field of mucosal immunology was ignored for more than 100 years. Only in the past 10, 15 years, with advancement of, the microbiome and all of that, the field of mucosal immunology also flourished. Now we have a journal called Mucosal Immunology. There are international meetings about mucosal immunology. And why? Because they teach us about importance of the gut in many, many areas of body's physiology.
Yeah,
For example, we know that the gut is playing a role in oral tolerance, a mechanism that protecting us against foreign material, a mechanism that teach us to live in harmony with gut microbiota. Our immune system should not attack our own gut microbiota. Our immune system should not attack the food antigens and proteins and peptides which we consume. So we call that oral tolerance, which is induced by a type of cell discovered about 15 years ago called regulatory T cell. The other part, which is important for gut immune function, mucosal immune system, development of mucosal immune system, secretory IgA, how much secretory IgA is playing a role in preventing entry of undigested food and bacterial toxins to the submucosa and then regional lymph nodes and circulation, and prevention of autoimmunities. The gut is playing a role in the establishment of barrier integrity. And finally, the gut microbiome also is playing a role in overall immune system. We call that systemic immunity, in particular immune function.
Yeah, that's amazing, and that's really exciting. So could you give sort of an overview, if someone was trained in immunology but not in mucosal immunology, what would they be missing if they didn't understand that? Because my understanding is that 80% of total immunity comes from the gut and this mucosal immunity. So what would be, it sounds like people would be missing the majority of our defenses, if they weren't looking at this.
They will continue doing the same thing as they did during past 30 years to individuals in the alternative medicine who were the pioneers in the field talking about gut dysbiosis and its relationship to the health and diseases. So the bottom line is this, that because they did not read or they are not reading these scientific journals in the field of mucosal immunology, they are going to dismiss completely this whole idea of gut microbiome playing a role in human health and diseases. One of the classical examples is a joke about fecal transplant, which is, really the idea is taking good bacteria and introducing it into the body of an individual who is having problem with the gut inflammation, and other disorders, including metabolic syndrome. So, but they will make a joke out of that, other than looking at the mechanism, how, based on immunology and microbiology, how this good bacteria is going to work to change the balance between T helper 1 and T helper 2 and regulate the immune system and the mucosa, and therefore preventing all those disorders associated with GI disorder.
Yeah. So over the course of this whole summit, we've heard from people in fields as diverse as psychiatry and endocrinology and neurology and gastroenterology. All of these areas, these have seemingly in the past been separate from our understanding of the gut. But it seems to me from all of these experts that the gut is playing such a major role in the in inflammation and the process of upregulating and downregulating inflammation and just inflammation generally in the body, that there's almost no reason why, as medicine evolves, the gut needs to be really associated with all forms of medicine.
Yes, I'm 100% with you. We're agreeing with you. And I'll introduce another terminology. They're telling us that usually they are using saying, you are what you eat. Why they tell us you are what you eat? Because if you are on vegetarian diet, you have different microbiota. If you eat more meat or carbohydrates, you are going to have different microbiota. And so therefore, if you have a kind of diet which causing gut dysbiosis cause overgrowth of bad bacteria releasing endotoxins, which we call them lipopolysaccharides. Endotoxins not only causing inflammation in the gut, they can open the barrier, the tight junction proteins, and therefore undigested proteins and peptides, the lipopolysaccharides or endotoxins themselves can get into the circulation. Now the inflammation from the gut goes to the circulation, and even if we don't take care of inflammation in the gut, LPS can open the blood-brain barriers, and here is the connection between gut and the brain. I'm sure when you talk to some of those psychiatrists, they told you about that microbiota can change behavior. Microbiota can change also patient clinical symptomatology of chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia.
Yes.
Or patient with depression. When a group in Germany found that lipopolysaccharides, an antibody against lipopolysaccharides can be detected in patients with depression, major depression. If you repair the gut, if you give them probiotics and repair the barriers and reduce the endotoxin load, then also you repair the blood-brain barrier, and therefore depression will go away.
Wow, it's the evolution of medicine. It seems as that we're moving to a stage where we understand the connectedness of all the systems rather than the separateness, and that's a perfect example of that. And actually, just around this time, we have the launch of the new journal on the gut and the brain. It's been a huge connection. We've had neurologists speaking on it. We have psychiatrists. So it's certainly something that's more and more and more. So what you were referring to earlier was leaky gut, and that's a terminology again that when the naturopaths and other holistic doctors were using it 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago, were seen as talking in unscientific language. Just for everyone that's listening, because there are probably doctors who are listening who probably think it's unscientific, could you just sort of take us through, the literature or the science that's showing that this is a real phenomenon and the impact that it's having through the pathway that you just mentioned and other pathways?
I'll be very happy to go through this. And the kind of articles I'm reading about this subject, as you know, you mentioned already Science, Nature Medicine, Journal of Immunology, Journal of Microbiology. These are the first class of journals which talk about this. And for example, I have one of the articles from Science talk about the influence of gut microbiota on human health is continuous from birth to old age. And early environmental factors, such as method of delivery, whether it's a cesarean or natural birth, nutritional factors, breastfeeding, bottle feeding, and epigenetic factors. All of these have been implicated in development of healthy gut and its microbial symbionts. And any changes in gut microbial composition in early life, this is very important, can influence risk for developing disease later in life. And so when we talk about extrinsic environmental factors, we have to pay attention to antibiotics, because antibiotics are going to affect our gut microbiome. The diet, whether carbohydrate or vegetarian diet or protein diet based, all can have effect, positive and negative effect on our health. Stress and is extremely important. I am sure that you heard about some famous experiments in different universities. A professor who was conducting experiment in mice who were giving them certain diet, and they were in a certain environment, and majority of those mice were developing type 1 diabetes. So what happened that this professor moved to another university in different state. So he tried to repeat the same experiments, no results. What happened? Because change of environment, stress, and change of microbiota changed the outcome of his experiment. That's why that kind of things, that kind of experiments now open completely a new field of studies. So the environmental factors, stress, all of that together can affect the gut microbiota and its implication for human health. So any disruption in gut microbiota, which we call that gut dysbiosis, can lead to a variety of different diseases, including inflammatory bowel disease, colon cancer, irritable bowel syndrome, gastric ulcers, liver disease, obesity, metabolic syndrome, asthma, atopy, hypertension, mood and behavior disorder. Hormonal factors also affect the gut microbiota. Why? Because the gut microbiome, the gut bacteria, have receptors for hormones. So the hormones also, that's why stress and hormones can affect the gut microbiota. So we have to pay attention to all of that and their influence on the gut microbiome, which is so important in human health and diseases.
Yeah, and so what you've laid out there is basically almost any symptom that you have or any sort of disease, basis of a disease, you should be looking at the gut as a primary way of dealing with it. But my understanding also is that even if you don't have the numbers to see the disease, this could also be going on, because I know with the leaky gut, a certain amount of times there's like this predictive autoimmunity where, you don't quite have autoimmune disease, but you have, you're on your way to developing it. So I'm sure there are a lot of Americans out there that are sort of on their way to having one or more of these autoimmune diseases, but they just don't have the symptoms to put them in that category yet. Is that fair?
Yes, James. 45 years of my work ended up with the most important development, which is my passion, is called predictive antibodies, which I published several articles in this field. And predictive antibodies are antibodies detected in the blood or saliva 5 to 10 years before the onset of disease development. By looking at those biomarkers, we can make changes in the gut microbiota, change in the mucosal immune system, change in the gut dysbiosis and gut integrity, change in overall immune function. We can prevent the onset of many autoimmune diseases which affect about 53 million Americans. Wow. And about 10% of the world population. So that's really my passion. Early detection is the answer. We cannot wait until the patient will have full-blown disease and just treat them for their symptoms. and they will be on medication for the rest of their life. But if we'll pay attention to the root cause of diseases, which are environmental triggers, such as infection in the mouth, dietary proteins and peptide, correct diet, and many toxic chemicals, xenobiotics, which all the above can affect the gut microbiome, and the gut microbiome, which is connected to overall human health and diseases, could be prevented if we'll pay more attention to the gut microbiome and the environmental triggers.
So if you've got 50 million Americans that have autoimmune disease right now, if you added in all of the people that have these predictive antibodies, how many people would that be?
I think at least 1 out of 2
Wow. So
will detect predictive antibody.
And that would explain why these numbers of autoimmune diseases are sort of skyrocketing. And one of the reasons maybe why we don't realize that it is skyrocketing is that rheumatoid arthritis gets treated by a rheumatologist, and irritable bowel syndrome gets treated by a gastroenterologist. And so, you're at a point where it doesn't look like it's the same disease, but from what I'm hear you saying is that just because of the causative factors, it sort of is the same disease, just playing out in different systems for different people, right?
Yes. If really gastroenterologists and rheumatologists, especially I'm talking now to the rheumatologists, if they knew that only this year, about 20 different articles that I read, published in scientific journal, connecting the oral bacteria such as Porphyromonas gingivalis to rheumatoid arthritis, because Porphyromonas gingivalis secreting a toxin, the toxin gets into the gut, changing the gut microbiome, changing the gut permeability, causing leaky gut syndrome. Now the bacterial toxin get into the body, activating certain lymphocytes, and then those activated lymphocytes can get to the joint, plus the toxin in the joint, causing such inflammatory response, which after 5 to 10 years will end up with full-blown rheumatoid arthritis, which the rheumatologists are taking care of them. But if we'll detect that at the early stage where the patient is having problem with the gum and will go to the dentist, we'll get rid of that. That way we can prevent full-blown rheumatoid arthritis in many patients. This is just an example.
Yeah, so that's a great example, and I think it really brings home the importance of, one, understanding the body as this, this holistic entity, which, it's all added, because I'm pretty sure there are no rheumatologists who having a good relationship with a dentist or referring to a dentist, but it seems like if we want to get to the root cause of these diseases and really reverse them or deal with the problems at the root cause, we're going to have to develop these kind of relationships.
Yes, absolutely. And back to the predictive antibodies, James, I have done some research by looking at blood of 1,000 healthy subjects, so-called healthy subjects. We bought or purchased the blood from different companies which screened the patients to be healthy based on some testing. But to me, that represents the population in the US. Just a small example. We found that 25% of those made antibodies against gluten. About 25% made antibodies against milk. Recent article just is going to be published in about 2 weeks in Journal of Applied Toxicology. I looked at antibodies against different xenobiotics, including bisphenol A, aflatoxin, parabens, and many other chemicals which all of us are exposed to on a daily basis, which can affect our gut microbiome, and found about 15 to 25% of healthy population making antibodies against these xenobiotics. What is the meaning of that from immunological point of view? That we are exposed to all these chemicals Not in every person. These chemicals are going to be metabolized and secreted from our system. Unfortunately, in about 25%, these chemicals and their metabolites form a complex with human tissue. The results of that will be autoimmunity. So the choice we have, the only choice we have, because we detect these predictive antibodies, these antibodies in such a high percentage of population, try to remove the triggers. If it's infection, we have to go to the dentist. If it's in the gut, we have to pay attention to the gut immune function. If these are chemicals, we have to remove them from the environment. But unfortunately, the trends, the way the lifestyle is going, we are increasing and introducing more toxic chemical to our environment and therefore to the population as a whole all over the world.
Absolutely. So can you just take us through the things that we need to be avoiding if we want to keep a healthy microbiome? Because it seems like from everything that we've heard, the number one thing that you could do to keep yourself healthy and prevent all of these different diseases is to focus on making sure that your gut has a good, solid microbiome, that it's deep and broad. There's a wide range of microbes in there. What are the things that we're doing as a society that are causing the problems, and what can we do to get back to normal?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, there is no one formula which is going to work for everybody. Let's make that clear. But I can talk overall. Why one formula is not going to work for everybody? Because each one of us, we have different gut microbiome. But the good news is that the articles I read, that change in the diet can rapidly change or alter the human gut microbiome. So number one, change your diet. If you have problem with gut immune function and overall with immunity, change your diet. For example, if you are eating too much meat, add more vegetables to your diet. Add more fruits to your diet. However, here I want to add one more item, that to be on organic diet is extremely, extremely important. An article I read in Environmental Health Perspective, they took few kids. They put them on normal diet. They looked at pesticides in the urine. They found significant elevation in pesticides in the urine of that group of children who tested. Then they switched them to 5 days of organic diet. They could not detect those chemicals, those pesticides in their urine. They put them back on normal diet. One more time, they could detect exactly the same chemicals in their urine. So yes, we can recommend changing the diet, but we have to make sure that diet is going to be organic diet.
Yeah.
So number one is pay attention to the diet, because diet can alter and change the human gut microbiome within days. And the article I have in front of me, in 5 days they could find changes in gut microbiome by changing from carbohydrate to vegetarian diet.
Yeah.
Example. So that's number one.
So can we just chat a little bit more about that? Because I know that there are certain foods that are, prebiotics that help with the development of the good bacteria. What are some of those foods?
Those which contain fructooligosaccharides.
I know we've had people talking about things like asparagus and other green vegetables like that. Is that sort of online?
Yeah, I have no doubts those are the one. And broccoli. Lots of vegetables are really, overall
Well, I know you're an immunologist and not a nutritionist, so I'll leave that more questions about that to the nutritionist. But let's continue on. So you said the diet. Are there any other diet things that we should be watching out for? Because I listened to the gluten summit last year with Tom O'Brien, and it was pretty clear that in a decent number of people, gluten is causing the degeneration of the lining of the mucosa and the gut integrity, right?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. That's why when I give a lecture in the beginning and the end of my talk, I have this triangle saying that detect, remove, and repair. So detect, if a patient is making antibodies like those which I was talking about, the 1,000 individuals, 25% of them make antibodies against gluten, make antibodies against milk, make antibodies against soy or corn, then it is wise to remove those items from the diet because those proteins are not compatible with the gut microbiota of that individual. That shows the gut microbiota and the enzymes and all the whole system together cannot digest those proteins to become peptides and then to amino acids, and therefore the undigested peptide can get in circulation. We make antibody against them. So it's logical, based on those testing, to remove those environmental triggers, in this case, the dietary components, which we make antibody against them. So gluten is one of them. Milk is another one. But in some individual, could be completely different foods to be removed from their diet.
So that's the beauty of seeing a practitioner who can help you to, put together like a doctor who can help you to put together maybe an elimination diet or something like that so that you can see what the most important thing is for you.
Yeah. And also then we have to look at infectious agents. If they, for example, make antibodies against H. pylori or Mycoplasma, or they make antibodies against Yersinia enterocolitica, it is wise to pay attention to these bacteria, to treat them, and hopefully that will reverse their effect on the gut microbiome. So dietary proteins, infection, whether it's in the gut or in the mouth, we have to pay attention to that. And finally, we have to pay attention to the xenobiotics, all these chemicals that on daily basis, without paying attention. If you go now to any coffee shop, they give you a cup of coffee. The cup of coffee is made in, served to you in a paper cup, coated with a layer of bisphenol A. And all of us, we are blinded and using that without thinking. We are drinking from plastic bottles. So we are loaded on daily basis with many chemicals. That's why 700 different chemicals in 1987 were detected in the body fat of people who were tested in America. And there are more by now probably we have several thousands in our tissue. This is the body burden of chemicals. So we have to try to minimize. So healthy diet, organic diet, remove the infection as much as possible or treat the infection, and finally try to remove the xenobiotic from your environment and from your diet. Do you know that if you take shower and put shampoo on your body or whatever, you wash your hands with soap, you are introducing at least 10 to 15 to 20 different chemicals into your own system. And so this is what's happening. We have to pay attention to the role of environmental triggers in the induction of immune disorders. Yeah. Otherwise, these numbers are going to be increased from year to year, and we are witnessing an epidemic of allergies, epidemics of autism, epidemics of ADD, ADHD, and autoimmunities.
Absolutely. So there's environmental triggers can be diet and can also be toxicity. Are there other environmental triggers that lead to this, or are those the major two categories?
There are three: infection.
Oh yeah, and the infection as well.
Dietary components and infection and toxic
toxicity. What about the antibiotics? I know that's a big way in which we're disrupting the gut microbiome.
Yeah, thank you very much. Asking about antibiotics, to me, that's a category of chemicals.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not different from any other chemicals. James, for your listeners, I would like to introduce an article recently I wrote for a very special issue of a journal called Autoimmune Disease, which is, I'm the editor of that special issue. 11 different articles written by different researchers in the world. This article, which is the leading article written by me, it's entitled A Potential Link Between Environmental Triggers and Autoimmunity. So they can read about this whole issue we were talking in the past 5 minutes about, the role of environmental triggers in immune function and autoimmunity. So autoimmune disease, 2014, under Vojdani, Vojdani.
Yeah, we'll definitely take a look at that. And this is another part of the evolution of medicine, is that this kind of information is not just available to doctors. Everyone can find this information. It's available, and you can listen to this kind of information here today. So, Doc, there's patients on here who are listening to this, I'm sure, who are really rethinking, the way that they're going to go about looking after their symptoms, and a whole array of types of symptoms, whether they be manifesting in the gut or in any other part of the body, because this inflammation and the dysbiosis and the leaky gut is so crucial to everything. But I'm sure there are also, doctors and other practitioners that are listening that are interested in doing great medicine and really getting to the cause. I know more and more doctors are seeing the ability through functional and integrated medicine to get to the cause and deal with the cause, so they can help their patients remove these environmental toxins and remove the infection or deal with the infection and change their diet in a positive way. For the doctors who are listening, who want to do better medicine and want to help their patients more quickly, what are some tips or tools or other things that you can provide for them to help them to get better results with their patients and get their patients back to a healthy optimum as quickly as possible?
Excellent question. My message to them, yes, my friends, although I know you guys are very busy, you don't have time, but please, if you have any extra time, go to scientific journals such as Mucosal Immunology, Nature Medicine, Science, and Nature, and read about some of these articles, fascinating articles about the role of gut microbiome in human health and diseases. By doing so, plus going, if you don't have time, then at least you can find 3 or 4 days time and go to functional medicine meeting, other alternative medicine meetings, and educate yourself about the role of environmental triggers, gut microbiota in immunity and health. And by doing so, you are going to help your patient significantly and prevent many diseases at early stage as possible.
That's so great, and I certainly agree with that. I've had some conversations over the summer with people that are actually on the cutting edge of some of the citizen science with regard to microbes in the gut. So there are ways that you can go and measure your own gut microbes and see exactly what's going on in the gut. And, some of that information is looking at how do you actually develop a really solid microbiome. And maybe you could just comment on this, because it seems to me from what you just said, yes, a doctor or a dentist can help to deal with the infection, but it seems to me like the majority of our ability as patients, or patients' ability to avoid autoimmune disease, is really taking responsibility for the diet and the toxins, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But it also, in some of this research that I've been reading, it said that the number one way, well, there are lots of different ways that you can get good microbiome. Like you can take probiotics, you can eat food that has, probiotics in it. But what was really interesting to me is I saw that they were saying that the people with the best microbiomes were people that were always in nature, people who lived on a farm or had a pet or got into nature regularly, because just by lying on the grass or putting your hands in the dirt, you're getting access to a whole range of microbes that end up making it into the gut, and it's a really effective way. That again seems like another step where medicine is evolving in the way that that's not a medical intervention. That's just going to the park or, getting outside and getting into nature. Is that along the lines of what you're seeing as far as like, how do we actually improve the microbiome once we know that it's, suboptimal?
Yeah. You said it all, actually. So the bottom line is that we have to pay attention to the environmental triggers that you mentioned. Also, we can support our gut microbiome, not just by diet. We can take probiotics. We can take supplements such as glutamine and acetylcysteine. Let's not forget that the same cell I called that regulatory T cells, which regulate the mucosal immune system, which is responsible for establishment of oral tolerance. And if there is a break in oral tolerance, can result in autoimmunity. So the same type of cells, regulatory T cells, have receptors for two vitamins, vitamin D and vitamin A. So therefore, when we take supplements such as vitamin A and vitamin D, we can activate our regulatory T cells to regulate the mucosal immune function. That regulates the microbiome and therefore can prevent leaky gut syndrome and autoimmunities. And so those are few of many. Of course, the clinicians, they have an array of lists of different items in addition to that. But to me, those are the most important one, L-glutamine, probiotics, and vitamin A, vitamin D, and there are many other nutritional factors such as boswellia, curcumin, which is anti-inflammatory, and many, many others that, I'm sure the clinicians know more about them than me.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of good stuff out there. I'd love to just ask you about science in general, because you're a scientist, you're not a doctor seeing patients, but you're in the field of science. And it seems to me, from someone who's not in the scientific world, that just the pathway that you just described, that it's a complicated pathway. It's a number of things happening. It seems to me that in this quest to really understand truth, we've gone so far down the path of reductionism that now that we really need to understand the body as a holistic entity, it's going to be difficult to sort of retool science to be able to really understand this. Like, the gut microbiome is a perfect training tool to help everyone to see that holism exists, because these microbes that we thought were bad are now good, and what is good and what is bad is changing all the time, and science is changing. And it's if nothing else, it's a lesson in the interconnectedness of everything. How do you think science is going to cope, big science is going to cope in the next 10 or 15 years to deal with learning that the body is an interconnected system, given that their paradigm is so reductionist in nature?
Yeah. James, I'm very happy that you asked that question, and you put the question to a scientist, and so therefore the question is not about medical doctors, because in my opinion, the field of science is ahead of medicine by 30 years. And so, unfortunately, all these articles, you and I talked about them, all these issues, we talked about it in the past 20, 30 minutes, only small percentage of clinicians are familiar with. But scientists, if they read these journals, if they do research in the field, there is no doubt that we'll come to conclusion this is fascinating field, extremely important field, and gut is connected almost to every single system in our body. And for example, here I have an article from Nature Medicine in front of me. Gut feeling, the emerging biology of gut-brain communication. So this area is going to flourish more and more, and hopefully, my hope is that not only the scientists will become aware of this, I hope this information through different avenues such as functional medicine, alternative medicine, will get to the mainstream of medicine, so they will be able to use some of this information for treatment of their patients and prevention of many disorders, which affects 1 out of 2 Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a massive crisis that it warrants. But one of the things that I think is exciting is that you have people who'll be listening to this now, and they're going to seek out doctors that understand or are ahead of this information. And so it seems to me that like this, you know, these kind of summits or these kinds of events really help to accelerate this evolution of medicine, because, you know, if we look at you mentioned organic foods earlier, you know, why are there so many more organic foods now? Why does the grocery store that I used to go to in Georgia, rural Georgia in 2005, that had no organics, I go back, 8 years later and it's got tons of organics? It's because of consumer demand. Like, the consumers realize that this is important, they start demanding it, and then it sends these price signals and information signals out to the rest of the industry that this is something important. Now, it's the same thing with this. If you have a whole network of functional medicine doctors, which we have in Revive Primary Care, where you can go and there's one almost in every zip code now, if thousands of patients start wanting to get this type of medicine, then you're sending price signals out to the rest of medicine, and it forces everyone to catch up. And to me, this is an exciting time. You said it was an exciting time to be in science and immunology, but as a result, it's an exciting time to be in medicine because, I was definitely the weird kid at school who did the natural therapies. My parents were really into it. And for a long time, these doctors took a lot of abuse from mainstream medicine because they were not scientific and they were quacks. And now here we have a situation where we're now starting to understand that the body is holistic in nature. The body does have an interdependence with all the different systems. And now it's sort of the time of this kind of practitioner to shine. And so I'm really excited about driving consumer demand to those types of practitioners so that more and more doctors realize they've got to get on the ball. They've got to start reading these journals. They've got to understand microbial and mucosal immunity.
Yes, 100% agree with you. And there are some lights out there. For example, last week or 10 days ago, the Institute of Medicine came out with a list of the foods that they call them the dirty dozen. And then the other 15 which are healthier to eat. And so if we read those kind of articles, we find out even washing fruits by high pressure, we are not going to remove the pesticides and herbicides from the fruits and vegetables. Therefore, the choice is organic. And that article very elegantly was written, and I highly recommend that, to read that article as well. And finally, I would like to give you a lot of credit. This kind of summits you guys are putting together, and other colleagues which I have been interviewed for in the past few months, Dr. O'Brien and others, extremely are educating thousands and thousands of people. And if even these individuals are not, majority of them are not medical doctors, patients can take this information to their doctors, and that way the doctors will go after these journal articles, and we hope they will educate themselves and try to help their patients by recognizing that there is something called gut dysbiosis and gut microbiome, and why gut microbiome is so important in human health and diseases.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree, and thank you, for saying that. We're all working together, and the problem couldn't be any more real or huge or appropriate. Autoimmune disease and chronic disease is on a pathway to bankrupt not just America, but every economy that is westernizing and getting the Western, chronic diseases. And the truth is, although the doctor is important, the role of doctor is less important than in the past, because as you just said today, if we can improve the diet, get rid of the toxins, reduce the stress, work with the microbiome, we can really reduce our predictive autoimmunity, we can reduce autoimmune, we can reverse chronic and autoimmune diseases. And although the doctor might be providing some guidance in that situation, it's more on the patient. It's what the patient chooses to do in the 167 hours a week that they're not in the doctor's office. And so we have a real opportunity to build a new type of medicine that's based on patient empowerment rather than medical patriarchy.
That's right, Jane.
Well, I really appreciate your details today. For those doctors who are interested in learning more about your work or finding out more about it, or patients, what's the best way to to find out about what you're doing or to interact with you?
Dr. Ari at msn.com. That's and my telephone number also is 310-657-1077.
Awesome. Well, I hope that, my intention with this summit is that we shine a light on people that are ahead of the curve. And the majority, I think, of integrated medicine is ahead of the curve. I had heard from so many people that you really had an amazing handle on, on all of these areas. And I really appreciate the opportunity to get this information from you and share it to a wider audience. You can hopefully tell from me that this is something that I'm passionate about. Our goal with this summit is to let people know what's going on and then give them easy resources to find practitioners that can partner with them to create long-term health. And I really honor your role in finding this. The last question I would ask you, Doctor, is this whole conference has been on the evolution of medicine, and it's been awesome. I've asked every doctor that I've had on or scientist to give me their own perspective on the evolution of medicine, and it's been universally just amazing with what everyone's shared. From your perspective as a scientist, when I say the words evolution of medicine, what does it bring up for you?
Yeah, in my own field, I go back to 1965, almost 50 years ago, which I took the first courses in immunology. And then during my master thesis and PhD between 1969 to 76, I became instructor of immunology, teaching immunology in the laboratory. And then we were using testing such as ring test, immunodiffusion, agglutination, and those were very primitive testing. Today, whatever I used to do for my PhD, which took me probably 5 years to finish, I can finish it in 2 months. So we made significant advances in medicine. From diagnostic point of view, different methodologies such as ELISA, microarrays, functional MRIs, and many, many more. But unfortunately, we put too much emphasis on the genes which are responsible for about 10% of the immune disorders. So therefore, also we put too much emphasis also on drug development and managing the symptoms of many disorders. But we did not pay attention to prevention of diseases. We ignored completely the role of environmental factors or triggers in various immune disorders, including allergies and autoimmunities. I hope by looking at the evolution of medicine, and today we have all this technology, all these good scientific journal articles which are based on solid science showing the importance of gut microbiome, the mucosal immune system, the gut barriers in health and diseases. Hopefully, clinicians will take advantage of these and use these in their practice.
Absolutely. Now, that's a great answer to the evolution of medicine. Dr. Aristo Vojdani, thank you so much for your time this evening, and it's been great to spend this time with you. I look forward to many more opportunities to accelerate the evolution of medicine. This is the Evolution of Medicine Summit. We've got great other talks for you today and all throughout the week. We've referenced some of those already. Thank you so much again for being on, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.